Okay, good morning, everybody. I think we're now live, so I'll get started. And I want to give everybody a warm welcome to the start of the UK-Canada Hydrogen Week. We've got ahead of us 5 days of in-depth discussions on various aspects of hydrogen, starting today with government strategies, but running through the week covering topics such as research and development and funding strategies. I'll be your moderator for today. I'm Sam Jeremy, and I work in the British High Commission in Ottawa, heading our science team across Canada. And before we get started, I wanted to give a very warm congratulations and thanks to Mario, our colleague in Montreal, who has put the whole week together. I think today, or for the week, we've got 813 participants scheduled to be here. So I just wanted to say thank you up front to Mario, who's pulled all of this together. So without further ado, then, I'm now going to hand over to our opening speakers from the UK and Canada. And we're going to start with the UK side. And I'd like to introduce the British High Commissioner to Canada, Susanna Goshko. Over to you, Susanna.
Thank you, Sam. And thank you for asking me to join you this morning. I'd like to start by thanking our organising partners at the National Research Council of Canada, at UK Research and Innovation, and at Innovatech, and all our distinguished speakers for the week. And I'm very grateful to the Honourable Dale Nally, Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity for the Government of Alberta, for his participation. And I'm also delighted to be here today with Pascal Champagne from the National Research Council of Canada to launch this strategic activity, the UK-Canada Hydrogen Week. And finally, I'd just like to echo your comments, Sam, on passing on my thanks to Mario, who I agree has done an absolutely superb job in the organisation of this really exciting week. So this event brings together two important priorities for the UK and our strong relationship with Canada: climate action and innovation. And it also builds on previous UK-Canada activities that my team have put together, such as events on carbon capture, utilisation and storage, and the hydrogen value chain and hydrogen blending standards development, a hydrogen policy roundtable, and a report on opportunities for hydrogen in Alberta's low carbon economy. Climate change is the biggest challenge facing the planet. The UK is putting climate change and biodiversity at the heart of the global agenda in 2021 through our G7 and COP26 presidencies, with the conference in Glasgow almost upon us. When it comes to reducing carbon emissions, innovation and hydrogen technologies are powerful tools which will play a crucial role. Neither the UK nor Canada will be able to reach our net zero targets without reorienting parts of our economies to hydrogen. Exactly 2 months ago, the UK launched its first ever hydrogen strategy. It sets out in more detail how we intend to achieve the commitments laid out in the Prime Minister's ambitious 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, including outlining how the UK government will work with industry to meet its ambition for 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen production capacity by 2030. In the UK, hydrogen has the potential to provide a third of the UK's energy in the future. And our hydrogen strategy sets the ambition for the UK to lead the global race to ramp up hydrogen technology and capture the benefits of early R&D and private investment on prosperity. With the increasing global deployment of hydrogen tools, we need to better understand how it can contribute to climate change mitigation. We also need to understand the risks and challenges of the application of hydrogen technologies to fighting climate change and work together to mitigate these. This will need unprecedented international collaboration across a range of stakeholders to harness the potential of hydrogen technologies for climate action and prosperity. Therefore, I'm pleased that this event brings together participants from government, academia, civil society, and business. The UK and Canada are world leaders in hydrogen and natural partners in the fight against climate change. Together, our two countries can lead the international community in the responsible development of hydrogen tools on the road to net zero. So I wish you a very productive bilateral Hydrogen Week, and I look forward to working with you all on this important issue over the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susanna. I'd now like to turn to Pascal Champagne, who is the Director General for Energy, Mining and Environmental Research at the National Research Council of Canada. Over to you, Pascal.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Your Excellency. Good morning to my colleagues in Canada and good afternoon to our friends across the Atlantic. First, I would like to acknowledge that the National Research Council of Canada facilities are on the traditional unceded territories of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Their ancestral footsteps and rights extend beyond the boundaries that exist today. We respectfully honor these people's rights, history, and relationships with this land. I'm pleased to be part of this event and to have the chance to say a few words. I'm particularly happy to support the strong, long-lasting relationship that we have with our British partners. As part of the Canada-UK Memorandum of Understanding on Science and Technology signed in 2017, our two countries meet annually at the Joint Science and Technology Cooperation Committee, or JSTCC. This year's meeting, held last month, focused on shared priorities between Canada and the UK in 3 areas: health, emerging technology and data, and clean growth and climate change. Our shared interest in hydrogen was discussed under the 3rd topic, so the conversations to be held over this week's event are particularly relevant and timely. As the Government of Canada's lead for the Hydrogen Strategy for Canada, an ambitious framework that seeks to position Canada as a global hydrogen leader, Natural Resources Canada, or NRCan, emphasized the following points at the JSTCC. Canada views hydrogen as an exciting resource that can help Canada achieve its net zero goal while creating new jobs, growing our economy, and protecting the environment. Canada is one of the top 10 hydrogen producers, in hydrogen production and fuel cell technologies in the world today. Clean hydrogen could reduce our annual greenhouse gas emissions by up to 45 megatons a year in 2030 and has the potential to deliver up to 30% of Canada's end-use energy by 2050, abating up to 190 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions through deployment in transportation, heating, and industrial applications. Canada's strengthened climate plan and our recent budget 2021 provided $1.5 billion to establish a clean fuels fund to support domestically the production of clean fuels, including hydrogen, across Canada. This fund would help Canada deliver early actions on the hydrogen strategy for Canada. NRCan also noted that the UK hydrogen strategy acknowledges shared challenges and opportunities in developing our respective hydrogen sectors. NRCan has been collaborating with the UK government on hydrogen-related issues, for example, the Mission Innovation Clean Hydrogen Mission and the Clean Energy Ministerial Hydrogen Initiative, and looks forward to strengthening these collaborations bilaterally and multilaterally as part of the implementation of the recommendations outlined in the Hydrogen Strategy for Canada. Turning to my own organization now, as Canada's largest federal research and development organization, the National Research Council helps foster innovation through our national network of researchers and facilities, as well as through direct support to industry with our Industrial Research Assistance Program, better known as NRC IRAP. We play 3 roles. We advance knowledge, we support government policies, and we catalyze business innovation. NRC is over 2,200 scientists, engineers, and technicians in labs in 22 locations across the country. The NRC IRAP is a network of 272 technology advisors across the country, supporting 9,349 Canadian SMEs. In keeping with the NRC's role as a catalyst and a convener for academia, industry, and government, both nationally and internationally, to tackle Canada's and the world's greatest challenges, NRC plays a pivotal role in the Canadian hydrogen technologies and clean fuels ecosystem. The NRC has a long history of conducting strategic research in the area of hydrogen according to the priorities of the Government of Canada and industry. Hydrogen technologies across the value chain are being explored in several research centers across the NRC. This includes areas ranging from materials development to support zero carbon fuel production from renewables to life cycle and techno-economic analysis to identify optimal pathways for fuel cells for a range of end-use applications, including in automotive, marine, and aviation applications. The NRC is exploring longer-term opportunities in Canada for hydrogen production through zero-emitting processes such as electrolysis, as well as biochemical and thermochemical methods of hydrogen production from solid and gaseous waste streams. The NRC is also undertaking research to develop hydrogen codes and standards to enable the hydrogen economy in Canada. This includes gaps analysis across the supply chain and life cycle analysis for various hydrogen production pathways. Clearly, there is scope in all these areas for increased engagement with the UK. Indeed, building partnerships to ensure that both countries have a prosperous economic future at the same time as addressing climate change is in everyone's interest. No doubt, over the next 5 years, we will have many discussions on the ways that we can do this. I look forward to continuing the productive history of collaboration between our two countries. Thank you and have a great week.
Thank you very much, Pascal, and thanks again to both of our two opening speakers, Susanna Goshko and Pascal Champagne. It's now the time for us to move straight into the first session, which is going to be a look at the approach that governments at both national and subnational level are taking to reorient aspects of their economies to hydrogen. We've got a fantastic panel of speakers today from both the UK and Canada, and we're going to start with the speakers from the UK, and then we're going to move straight into, after that, into the speakers from Canada. We will take a break after around 45 minutes, and then we'll come straight back to the speakers. And once the speakers are finished, we will then move to Q&A. So I would encourage all of the people participating today and following this discussion to put your questions throughout the sessions into the chat bar, and then we'll come back to the panelists, the full set of panelists at the end to talk through those questions. So we'll get started then, and I'm going to turn first of all to Richard North to get us started today. And Richard leads all aspects of international work around the UK's hydrogen strategy at BEIS, the UK's Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So Richard, over to you, assuming your IT is now working. Perhaps Richard's IT isn't working. Richard, are you there? Okay, I can see Richard is here, but presumably is having problems with his IT. So we'll give Richard a couple more seconds, and if that doesn't work, then we'll turn to our second opening speaker from the UK, which is Stuart, who I can see is eagerly anticipating that happening now. Okay,
Thank
Stuart,
you,
perhaps
Sam.
we can hand over to you then.
Of course, yeah. I'm sure Richard, oh, there's Richard back. There we are.
Thanks, guys. Apologies for the IT issues on my end. I'm going to share my window and proceed with my presentation, but please let me know if you can't see my presentation.
It's working fine now, Richard.
Great.
Over to you.
Okay. Thanks very much. So, can I just actually just confirm you can see my slides?
We don't see your slides. We see your Zoom link.
Okay, I think it might be best if Stuart goes first, and I'll try and work this out with you guys in the background.
Perfect.
Okay, perhaps in that case then, Stuart, if you wouldn't mind going, and just briefly to introduce Stuart. Stuart is the head of hydrogen policy at the Scottish Government. So over to you, Stuart.
Thanks, Sam. Let's just check if you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Can you see those?
I see them, yeah.
Yay, it's all working. I'm sure it will all work out in the end. Thank you so much. So as Sam said, I'm head of policy for Scottish Government on hydrogen. I've been working in hydrogen about 10 years, so been involved in quite a lot of things in hydrogen in Scotland. We are quite advanced in our policy development here in Scotland with hydrogen. So what we've concluded and the direction of our policy is to approach hydrogen not just as a tool to help us decarbonise, So it does play a significant role in achieving net zero, but it's not just an energy issue. For us, it represents an economic opportunity and perhaps a new industry for us, particularly with our export potential, which I'll talk about shortly. And as we look around us, we can see in the global situation, I mean, talking here today with this audience and the EU and the UK, hydrogen is really moving up the agenda. Policies are developing rapidly. Signals are being sent to markets that are very strong. And we see that happening, and we're responding to that as well. We're viewing hydrogen as a whole system. So we're looking at it and the role it can play across the system. And by the system, I suppose, I mean the economy. So we're looking at the production, the distribution of hydrogen, how it's going to be stored, perhaps geologically, perhaps in tanks, how we're going to trade with our neighbours, with the surplus hydrogen that we have, that we intend to have, how we're going to use hydrogen in our transport system, in industry, even in the production of synthetic fuels, and how we use hydrogen in buildings. It's not a warm country, Scotland. It's not as cold as Canada, but it's not a warm place. So we need a lot of heating, and most of that is gas at the moment. So how do we change that? And also, how does hydrogen help the whole energy system? We support green hydrogen production, but also blue hydrogen production. So low carbon with CCS. We think we need both for our systems to work. We've done a lot of work on hydrogen, a lot of assessments, a lot of studies and reports. We think that low carbon hydrogen, blue hydrogen is critical for us in Scotland to achieve net zero, particularly to decarbonise industry and difficult things like cement production, steel production, things like that. We think that we have a really big opportunity to be a leading hydrogen nation. And the reason we think that is that we have, for the size of our population, vast natural resources of offshore wind and onshore wind. We've got a skilled workforce, especially in the northeast of Scotland with our oil and gas legacy. And we think we can transition those people and those skills to work in a hydrogen economy. We've set a strong signal to the market. So we say that we can produce 5 gigawatts of hydrogen by 2030 and 25 gigawatts by 2045. So anyone who's an informed hydrogen geek like me will probably know that that's a lot of hydrogen production. We're taking a strategic approach as well. So we've set out areas where we think there is low regret and still decisions to be made, and then perhaps things for the future. Existing hydrogen use, that's grey production, is low-hanging fruit for us. We think we can tackle that and change that to blue or green. Fleet and heavy transport is another low-hanging fruit. So lorries, buses, trains, ships, ferries, those kind of heavy vessels and vehicles are very suitable to hydrogen. Heating in buildings, I'll talk about that in a minute. We've got a project that's looking at that. And industrial heat and processes are the next kind of low-hanging fruit. There's even roles in power generation, we think, for hydrogen, perhaps hydrogen power stations, peaking power stations in future. And there's a lot going on. And as I say, this is over the last 10 years or so. You can see all these projects, and they're really widely spread across Scotland, mostly in coastal regions. Mostly there's a lot on islands as well. And this is where our big emission centres are. So you can see, I'll just go back a slide, that the projects are reflecting quite well where the big emissions are. We are very supportive of regional development of hydrogen. And what we mean by that is hydrogen hubs, clusters of activity working together. Sector coupling is something you'll hear a lot about in the hydrogen world. So we're taking our strategic approach to that and working very closely with these key areas that I've circled there. A few of our projects that you may have heard of, this is H100, and it's 300 houses or so, hydrogen, 100% green hydrogen heating being developed. That means hydrogen boilers installed in houses, hydrogen cookers, hydrogen fires. So that's underway. It's construction started, and it will be live in 2022. It's taking its power from offshore wind and producing green hydrogen through an electrolyser with a storage system. It's a 5 megawatt installation electrolyser there. Aberdeen's buses are becoming quite famous now. There's 25 up there, double deckers. There's also 60 other vehicles that will run on hydrogen as well. Range of different size of vehicles, small vans and dustbin lorries, etc. So that's been going on for some time, and it's building and growing. This is our long-term assessment. So by 2045, this is what we hope to be producing or have the potential to produce. As you can see, a big export to Europe for hydrogen from Scotland, 94 terawatt hours of hydrogen, electrolysis there, and a big scale. Producing hydrogen, exporting it, using it indigenously as well. We've also imagined what that might look like. So this is an illustration of a large production plant. This could be on one of our islands, it could be in Aberdeen, it could be one of our coastal cities. So you've got there offshore wind producing hydrogen at scale, a gigawatt scale in this example here, servicing an export market by ship to the UK, perhaps, and also perhaps to Europe, and also servicing an industrial demand for hydrogen for housing, for heat, larger vehicles like trains and buses as well, and also industry too. And the use of hydrogen as a feedstock is something we're really interested in our industrial strategies. The next steps, and this is the last slide, I'll hand you back in a few minutes. The last slide here is about our next steps. So in 2020, we published a hydrogen policy statement that set out the 5 gigawatt ambition and the 25 gigawatt ambition by 2045. So that set out what we think of hydrogen in Scotland as a policy, and what we think is we're very supportive of it. We think it's important. The action plan I'm talking about here, that will be published soon, will set out what we're going to do about that. So that will be a more detailed document. We're also going to launch a £100 million hydrogen fund in 2022 to help accelerate the development of hydrogen in Scotland and build our hydrogen economy. And this is over the next 5 years. So this is our sort of next phase of our hydrogen policy. I hope that's useful, and happy to take questions later. Back to you.
Superb, thanks, Stuart. That's extremely useful and sounds like a very exciting set of plans. And as you say, we'll look forward to talking about them in more detail in Q&A later. So I'm hoping now that Richard has resolved the IT difficulties. Let's see if Richard is able to speak to us now.
I think we have. I think my slides are going to be popped up by one of the technical team.
Great.
That's great. Okay, so if we skip on to the first slide, I'm just going to say a couple of words then about the UK's hydrogen strategy, which was published in August. So our first slide here, just a brief overview of what's included in the hydrogen strategy. And just to outline really that the key approach, the key sort of message that we want to get across is that the hydrogen strategy that we've put together sets out in some detail what we need to do to drive progress to scale up low carbon hydrogen production and use in the UK within the 2020s. So as many of you will know, we have a UK-wide target for 5 gigawatts of production capacity by 2030, which we feel is a stretching target based on the fact that we have next to no low carbon hydrogen production in place at the moment in the UK. But obviously in the context of the excellent presentation we've just had from the Scottish colleague, you will note that there is a lot of ambition kind of more widely in the UK to go further by that time. So we're really focused on what we can do in the 2020s, this critical decade, to ramp up low carbon hydrogen production. So the key elements that I would just flag before we get into the detail are we're taking a twin track approach in the UK. So we're colour blind, as it were, or we're production technology agnostic. Interested in supporting both electrolytic and CCUS enabled hydrogen at present, and then looking further forward, also intrigued and keen to support developing technologies, including nuclear related production and indeed pyrolysis and other technologies that might come down the line in future. We think that's really important when it comes to international collaboration in particular, because that makes us well positioned to work with international partners looking at all different types of production technologies, as well as the parts of the value chain further on, which we'll come on to talk about in a sec. The strategy also talks about network and storage infrastructure. It sets out our initial thinking about what that is likely to look like through the course of the decade. And again, more on that in a moment. We also talk a little bit about the demand side, and we can map over the course of the 2020s where we see industry being the kind of lead market, as it were, for low carbon hydrogen uptake in the UK, before we see increasing demand across other major usage sectors, including power, heavy transport, and potentially heating, subject to UK government decisions that will be taken around 2026 with the result of our heat trials. But those are the four kind of segments that we will see increasing one by one over the course of this decade to get us to a place where that 5 gigawatt production target is well used and indeed expanding by 2030. The strategy itself was accompanied by 5 subsidiary policy documents, one of which was a consultation on the hydrogen business model, which sets out how we propose to support production in the UK over the coming years. That will be available to UK and to other producers, and it sits alongside the 240 million net zero hydrogen fund that we've already announced, and which funding is secured for out to 2024-25 to support capital investment. And then finally, I just draw attention to the fact that there's a lot of thinking that went into the strategy around economic opportunities. So we've given here a couple of the figures that we think we could see by 2030. So 9,000 UK jobs created and 900 million GVA by 2030 alone, unlocking 4 billion of private sector investment. And again, that is the last point that I would just make on this slide. The strategy is aimed very much at teeing up strong collaboration between the public and the private sectors, government acting to play a role in supporting low carbon hydrogen as it gets off the ground in this crucial decade, and then us moving on past 2030 into a much larger scale of demand and production. So if I skip on to the next slide, bearing in mind time, this is the roadmap that the UK has set out for its hydrogen economy development over that crucial decade. So without going into too much detail, you can see moving left to right here, how we envisage the hydrogen economy moving from small scale production, mainly electrolytic at present, direct pipeline co-location, so the usage of hydrogen in sort of narrowly defined sites, whether that's geographical or some of it being trucked around the country, but nonetheless connected small scale production to small scale utilization, and some use in different areas, including some transport. We've got good cases, for example, in buses, as has been mentioned already. Equally, we've got HGV, rail and aviation trials going on in the UK already. And as I said, we've got those neighbourhood heating trials. As we move to the right-hand side of the roadmap, you see all of this scaling up and moving forward over the course of the decade. So by the mid-2020s, we envisage large-scale CCUS-enabled production coming online in the UK, and larger scale electrolytic production consummate with the increase in offshore wind that the Prime Minister set out as his ambition, of course, as well. You see the expansion of cluster pipelines as we start with, so moving aside from individual kind of production and end-use clients to wider cluster networks, but still fairly concentrated, and a wider usage spread, so across different applications. right through to the late 2020s and eventually the mid 2030s onward, where we can look at the horizon and say we will be looking at regional or national networks that connect an increasing scale of production coming from different types of technology, and of course an increasing range of end uses, particularly looking after 2030 at international interconnectedness, so a trade potentially in low carbon hydrogen, and indeed some of that shipping, both import and export, that Stuart referenced to in his earlier presentation. And then along the bottom of this roadmap, you can see some of the areas that we've set out in the strategy in detail as to the cross-cutting areas of relevance that we think will be crucial to getting us to that 2030 ambition, and indeed to a longer term scale up beyond, looking forward to 2050. So there's a lot of work and a lot of thinking that's gone on into not only networks and regulation, market frameworks, but equally into how we can support through funding and through leveraging investment, both on the production side, for example, around research and innovation, equally though on this sort of end use side, supporting that end use take up and the increase in low carbon hydrogen economy scale in the UK through cross-cutting issues, including the development of the sector, thinking about the skills, the inward investment, the exports that we want to see to support that hydrogen economy growing in the UK, and indeed how we can incentivise industry to come in and invest, and indeed to increase consumer awareness as we move across this decade and smooth the path for low carbon hydrogen use to really take off in the UK as we want it to, in line with our net zero ambitions. So if I move on to the next slide, just dwelling here a little bit again on the twin track approach that we think is particularly relevant and makes us particularly good partners, certainly globally, but particularly with a view to Canada's own production ambitions and the sort of business model that we see kind of rolling out here and indeed on the other side of the Atlantic. So on the left-hand side, you can see a map of the UK, which gives a good sense of how widely spread our different types of low carbon production sites are at the moment. So there is a range of blue hydrogen and green hydrogen production projects coming online and ready to go in the next couple of years. But equally, we're thinking further forward about how that offshore wind potential that we have pledged to increase dramatically to 40 gigawatts from the current 10 gigawatts of offshore capacity over the next decade can be played in and can come in to support low carbon hydrogen production and indeed end use over the decades. Equally, we're thinking about carbon dioxide storage potential and indeed hydrogen storage potential, bearing in mind that the UK has some really strong natural, geographic and geological assets that make us well positioned to play a role, not only for our own purposes in those areas of the hydrogen economy, but equally in thinking about international collaboration and how we can work with others to incentivise global uptake of low carbon hydrogen. And then on the right hand side of this slide, we've just jotted down a couple of the key figures and key commitments that are included in the strategy. So we talked a little bit about the production ambition of 5 gigawatts by 2030, and indeed about the 240 million net zero hydrogen fund that's already been put in place, and that will provide more detail on early next year, which relates to development and capital costs to really get production up and running from where it is at near zero right now in the UK. We're also looking at the specific areas that we can dip into to support hydrogen production more precisely. So we've had the 60 million low carbon hydrogen supply 2 innovation competition, which is looking at different production technologies and supporting those get off the ground. And indeed, we'll be providing more detail on our overall production approach and the strategy early next year. So if we move on to the next slide. A couple of words here just about demand as we see it in the UK, and again emphasising the fact that we see demand spread across all of the 4 major end uses that are perceived globally for low carbon hydrogen production. So on the left hand side here you can see our figures for demand spread across different sectors by 2030. You can see as well that there's quite a significant scale up as we perceive it now in the demand that we're likely to see by 2035. So that reiterates the point that these 2020s are a really crucial decade for scaling up and getting this low carbon hydrogen production, indeed the wider hydrogen economy running, both here in the UK, but also of course globally, as we'd expect this model to be repeated elsewhere. You can see as well that there is quite a large discrepancy in one area in particular, the heat and buildings usage of low carbon hydrogen. That reflects the fact that there are some decisions to be taken and indeed some really important trials to complete in the next decade in relation to the use of low carbon hydrogen heat in particular. But it's worth flagging that indeed our ambition is for low carbon hydrogen to be used across all of these sectors at scale over the coming decades in the UK, which again makes us a particularly important and useful part of the global system, we think, both in terms of our expertise and our knowledge being spread across those areas, but equally in terms of an attractive investment proposition, of course. So again, on the right-hand side, I've given a couple of the commitments that relate to all of these areas over the coming decade. The purpose being to show that we are putting our money where our mouth is, and indeed putting our research expertise and that kind of world-leading UK sector that we believe makes us a strong player in this global race, global collaboration market, as it were, as well. So you've got everything from a call for evidence for hydrogen-ready industrial equipment to support take-up of low-carbon hydrogen in that sector, and equally supporting industry to transfer over using the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund and fuel switching facilities. Equally, you've got the heat trials and specifically the trials of hydrogen-ready domestic boilers, which gets a lot of an increasing amount of domestic attention here in the UK as well. We're consulting on some of these areas, trialling applications, and indeed we're going to make policy decisions around heat around 2026. Equally, we're looking at transportation usage. So we have the Tees Valley Transportation Hub in the northeast of England, which is doing a lot of work to concentrate our research and development of transport applications over the coming years too. And you can expect to hear more about our plans for the sector, the jobs, the skills and the workforce planning that we want to put in place to make sure that we're making the most of low carbon hydrogen economic benefits for the whole of the UK early next year in that sector development action plan. And finally, I would just flag that we're also thinking about the RNI side. So you will see coming down the line as well a UK Hydrogen Rni Roadmap, which will be an interesting basis for discussion, I think, in the context of mission innovation, which one of our colleagues mentioned earlier too. So if we move on to the final slides, just delving a little bit on UK Canada opportunities in particular. We've been really clear in the UK Hydrogen Strategy that we want to take an open and active approach to international collaboration. We think that's particularly important for low carbon hydrogen given its relatively early state of readiness and the level of production that's out there at the moment. It's helpful to think about what we can do to incentivise demand pull at one end of the spectrum, but equally to look at supply push. And that is where that innovation collaboration through forums such as the Mission Innovation Clean Hydrogen Mission is so important, where we can work together to trial new technologies and equally to bring costs down, particularly the costs of renewables-based low carbon hydrogen production, which at the moment aren't as competitive as we'd like them to be. But equally, it's important to join up that activity with that sort of demand side. So that's where we're looking forward to working with Canada, both kind of in the public space, but also public-private collaboration through activities like the Clean Energy Ministerial's Hydrogen Initiative, which is taking an increasingly active look at different applications, different parts of the low carbon hydrogen economy, including end uses like ports and shipping, but equally looking at regional value chains. And we're also looking at the standards piece through organisations like the IPHE, the International Partnership for Hydrogen Fuel Cells in the Economy. This year we had some really strong endorsement of low carbon hydrogen's importance in that kind of global climate and global green economic revolution context. So we had the G7, the G20, both sort of make strong statements of support for this area, and looking forward, of course, to COP26, where we intend to use our co-presidency next year to take the next step. So I'm just going to conclude as well by taking you through the right-hand side of this slide, which is basically a little bit of an expansion on the bilateral collaboration and where we think that can sit. So we're really excited by UK-Canada opportunities, and we think there's a lot that we can do. I've talked a little bit about production synergies and potential end-use synergies. But thinking more broadly, we want to talk about policy and regulation, both from a government-to-government perspective, but equally from an industry perspective, given the way that the global market links up now in certain sectors, but is likely to do so in future with low-carbon hydrogen. Equally, we want to talk about the sector. We want to think about how we can work with industry to incentivise investment and trade, and bearing in mind that the UK and Canada are both really well placed, including given our current expertise in oil and gas, to think about the transition of skills, the transition of workforce and knowledge, but equally to support innovation in this space. And indeed, we're looking to build on the opportunities specifically there around our strong research ecosystems, both within the mission innovation context, but also more widely. And I've given a couple of senses here as well. We might be able to look at specific areas, including storage, transportation, and use in industry, bearing in mind that roadmap approach that we set out earlier. So I'm going to conclude there and look forward to hearing from the next panelist in the presentation.
Fantastic, thank you, Richard. And again, a huge amount for us to get stuck into and digest in our Q&A later on. So I'm going to turn now to Gethin Weil, who is from the Welsh Government and who is the head of Smart Living, Climate Change and Energy Efficiency. And if I can just remind our speakers from both the UK and Canada that if we stick to about 6 minutes per speaker, that should leave us with a good amount of time for Q&A at the end. So over to you, Gethin.
Hi there, Sam. So I have a bit of difficulty getting my presentation up as a previous speaker. I don't know. I sent it to Athena. Can you get it up your end? There you go. Stop my video. If you could get it up, I start sharing on my screen here.
Athena, are you able to help with that?
Yes, just a second.
Thanks. Thank you everybody for inviting me today. Je suis ravi d'être invité à vous parler aujourd'hui. This is the first time I've had a chance to speak with hydrogen professionals from Canada. We've already had a very interesting session, I think, was it in July, with colleagues from Quebec in the CRIC, Association of European Hydrogen Interests and Nations. So it's really good to have a second opportunity to show what we're doing here in Wales. I suppose I think I'm very grateful to have had two preambles, really, both from colleagues in Scotland, also at UK central government level, who sort of contextualizes a bit what we're doing in Wales as a devolved nation within the UK. In that, in some respects, we have the same level of autonomy and similar goals. Scotland, both looking at decarbonisation and economic development imperatives, and also to some extent social justice as well, looking at geographical variations of hydrogen deployment and the phasing into the new net zero economy using hydrogen assets and shifting skills base and all those other variables. But on the other hand, we are part of the UK system, and we've just come off a meeting actually with other colleagues from BEIS, where we shared yet again with Welsh stakeholders all of the refinements of the UK government's hydrogen policy and all the interesting things that are out to consultation currently, which definitely have to be input so that we have a firmer picture in the new year. So I'm going to go through some of the sort of the genesis of our approaching Wales to hydrogen, and maybe give you a few case studies, which perhaps in that it's a relatively new pathway for us. Decarbonisation rather than economic development, I think, was the guiding force for hydrogen introduction for quite a while. But I think we've had a steep ascent in the last 2 to 3 years into hydrogen domain. So if I can you do the next slide, please? Here we go. Yeah. So broadly, this is our position, really. We just have to get in there. We have to reduce emissions, looking at sectorally appropriate deployment, and seeking to see how we can globally benefit from other early entrants' experience, and looking at a sort of placement within the UK and whether there are export markets, what are our strengths in terms of skills and renewables to get there. Next slide, please. So we really kind of, everything came together at the end of 2020. We commissioned a report from Element Energy, who are our kind of in-house consultants. It was very broad ranging. It looked more at the short to medium term, really, thinking what was happening at UK level with the UK government and their development of the 10-point plan and the energy white paper that came out around the same time. So we're looking at something that was more specific to Wales, and looking at the drivers that we could deploy most so suitably up to mid-decade, and then looking at the longer term to 2030. At the same time, of course, as we and other UK governments adopted a net zero approach and looking forward to the carbon budget in 2035 as well. So we consulted on that, and we've got some very interesting results actually, which are being put into policy at this time. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so the pathway is looking at drivers that we have kind of relative strength in currently economically. Hydrogen end use in transport is seen as a primary driver, both public sector and private, and perhaps manufacturing as well. Also looking at boosting production, which, as in most other parts of the UK, is relatively low level and grey hydrogen currently, with a fairly modest target to mid-decade, but a more ambitious one to the end of the decade, up to perhaps 1 gigabytes. And then looking at the cross-cutting opportunities, both in terms of industrial decarbonisation, skills, food, areas where the Welsh economy is particularly strong. So as you be mindful of the fact that Wales has got many ports of entry that are significant points of importation for hydrocarbons into the UK economy. So Milford Haven in southwest Wales, for example, is a point of entry for about 30% of the UK liquid natural gas needs currently. So there's lots of infrastructural assets that can be redeployed as well. Plus also, we've got some of the highest areas of industrial emissions in the UK. I think South Wales industrial cluster contributes about 12% of net UK industrial emissions. So the imperative for using hydrogen in those very kind of delineated heavy lifting contexts is quite strong. You can go to the next one, please. So we came up with 10 objectives as per the diagram. So as I said, they're relatively transport-led because we see demand as being kind of quite critical really, as opposed to relatively low levels of production in our projections for the first decade of the transition to net zero. And the next. This is just illustrative of how we frame them. The report's online. I'll supply the link after the meeting. But there's a lot of synergistic sort of imperative there for working across boundaries, working with Ireland, working with EU partners, and also looking at how we can exchange expertise. We've got a significant number of large emitters, which are foreign owned. They themselves have got very interesting kind of greening global strategy, which incorporate hydrogen, especially in the heavy industry end. And we benefit significantly from those. So that gives us a significant international reach beyond the fact that we're sitting within the UK in a relatively small economy. Next, please. Yeah, so this is broadly what it's all about. Certainly by 2030, it's a very similar sort of staging to what the UK government has published in its recent strategy. Perhaps less detail on this diagram, but it approximates to that, looking at our own current manufacturing and industrial strengths. Next, please. Yeah, so this is the state of play currently. We've also had a kind of political change. We've got a new climate change ministry, which is shifting emphases and putting more into kind of climate change infrastructure than the previous government. It's still Labour in Wales. The consultation on the pathway has been broadly accepted and is being worked up into a specific policy now. We've also got a net zero plan, which incorporates most of those findings, and that's coming out at the end of October, on the 28th, in fact. Plus, we are looking seriously at how we can align in a complementary way with all of the aspects of the UK strategy, and also looking at more particular aspects of skills development and qualifications. So, and in terms of having a kind of a core document and a fund, or something that integrates all the aspirations for engaging and deploying hydrogen, we will have something more concrete probably in the next couple of months, certainly in the new year, and it will be very much in tandem, we hope, with UK strategy at all levels. And just to give you a quick look at, this is how Wales is structured. We have a small economy with 3 million people, but we sit next to an economy with 50 million people, along a lot of actual routes to Ireland. And particularly in North East Wales and South East Wales, we have the benefit of 2 designated industrial clusters. South Wales Industrial Cluster in the south, SWIC, which extends all the way from east to west from the Milford Haven to the border with England. And then in northeast Wales, we have a zone of dense habitation and population and industrial activity that's very linked into the economy of the northwest of England. Next. Yeah, so this gives you an idea of what's being sort of developed in South Wales. So all of the variables are in here really. There's a hydrogen backbone that's tied into the work of Wales and West Utilities, main gas operator. There's various areas of industrial focus, academic expertise, ports of entry, and also exit for CCUS. So one of the characteristics of Wales in the south is that there's no natural resource for storing CCUS. So we're setting out our own program to develop capture technology and shipping technologies for CCUS as it comes along. The South Wales Industrial Cluster has a budget which, once realised and partnered with industry, could realise about 3 billion in investment until the end of decade in hydrogen deployment. So it's a fairly ambitious but very holistic approach they're taking. If you go to the next one, please. And in North Wales, this maps out areas of focus. We've got several hydrogen hubs, one in Holyhead, which is the second busiest port in the UK and in the northwest. And also, as I said earlier, areas of focus in Deeside on the border with England into Merseyside and northwest England. But in that particular zone, HyNet is the sequence cluster operator, which we're quite hopeful that they will get through in the first tranche of clustered applications, given that we have ample CCUS off the coast there near Rhyl and Ellesmere ports. If you go to the next one, please. And in addition, we've sort of in the last 4 or 5 years invested in various bodies and networking kind of structures to bring everyone together and integrate all of the actors in the hydrogen economy. So we have High Cymru, the trade body, that came into existence about 3 years ago. Next, please. I can show you a few case studies. This is Holyhead, as I mentioned earlier. We put in about £500,000 of transport investment into Anglesey and Ynys energy island, the hydrogen island. It's got a lot of nuclear, lots of significant infrastructure on that particular part of the Welsh coast. And the fund for the hub has benefited as well from complementary funding from UK government. We hope that's up and running in about 2 to 3 years' time. And that will also integrate to a similar hub that's being developed in North East Wales in Deeside, looking at transport demand for people along the North Wales industrial and transport corridor into England and down to the Channel ports into continental Europe. If you go to the next one, please. And then another focus, as I mentioned earlier, is the Milford Haven Energy Kingdom. That also is a very ambitious area with significant numbers of energy operators, including Valero, RWE, and several others that are working together in the South Wales Industrial Cluster to use this huge natural resource. A very similar modelling there, I think, as to what Arup did for our Scottish colleagues. I think it's almost the same graphic, actually. If you go to the next image, please. Yeah. So we started a kind of an 8-year project looking at how multi-vector systems can integrate hydrogen, both the local ground transport, kind of facilities to do with the ports, the various renewable sites there. There's a possibility for a couple of hydrogen villages just into the port as well. And RWE are setting up a net zero research centre on the Haven. So there's lots of beneficial synergies there, which we've got to capitalise on in the short to near term. And next. And just finally, we don't have a £100 million fund yet, I'm sorry to say. Though I hope that we'll have something more tangible in the early new year, given that we're looking at a net zero infrastructure fund currently and more global budgets for our new climate change ministry. But we also have had an SBRI launched in the last week, and that's going to throw in hopefully lots of interesting SMEs and projects which will feed into kind of mid-decade demonstrators and scaling up across the piece, both for power for industry and also possibly for heating as well and transport. So there's some interesting things going on. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. I think that's me done, I think. You know, just to reiterate my other colleague's message, the UK is open for business and Wales is particularly keen to engender international alliances and see where we can use our strength in renewables and skills profitably. So please ask questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Gethin. And that brings us to the end then of the 3 UK speakers. So I'm going to move now straight on to our Canadian speakers and start with Aaron Hoskin, who is a Senior Manager for Intergovernmental Initiatives and Fuel Diversification at Natural Resources Canada. And Aaron was also played a role in the development of Canada's hydrogen strategy. So over to you, Aaron. And once Aaron finishes, we're going to then go into a short 10-minute break before coming back for the rest of the Canadian participants.
Great, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to speak during this event. I don't have any slides. Well, I do, but being the last person before a break, I think it's better just to jump in and I'll walk through kind of what's in Canada's hydrogen strategy and some key areas of interest. And then I will kind of pass it over to the break. And then hopefully we can have a more robust discussion afterwards. And I thank all of the speakers prior to this as well. So thanks to the organizers for providing the opportunity to speak to you today regarding the significant economic and environmental opportunities that hydrogen can provide in Canada and around the world. But before I begin, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining the panel today from Ottawa, which is on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin First Nation. As has been mentioned a couple of times already, in December, Canada released our own hydrogen strategy, which was really the culmination of more than 3 years of analysis, consultations, ongoing collaborations with industry, governments at all levels, Indigenous partners, and businesses. And it really is a call to action that's really meant to identify areas on how to grow hydrogen production, distribution, and use across the country, while also positioning Canada to become that supplier of choice to the world for clean hydrogen and the technologies that use it. But Canada has been a world leader in hydrogen for more than a century. In fact, we like to say the hydrogen story really is a Canadian story with countries around the world. Our industry is already supporting hydrogen deployment around the world. If you look at any country, including the UK, for instance, there is Canadian technology or Canadian IP in more than 80% of global deployment right now, uses some aspect of Canadian technology. And there's a number of fuel cell buses that are on the roads today in several cities across the UK using Canadian technology. So the strategy for Canada shows how Canada has several advantages that can be levered to seize the opportunity. We have abundant natural resources and world-leading expertise in CCUS. As does the UK, and one of the world's lowest emitting electricity grid. And all of these production pathways are able to be levered to produce low cost, low carbon hydrogen across the entire country. And as was mentioned earlier, Canada's strategy is similar to the UK's in that it focuses not on production pathway or color, because you can't standardize a color, but what it does focus on is carbon intensity of various pathways. No single pathway has been left out except possibly gray. But what's important is over time, that carbon intensity, regardless of pathway, needs to be levered down towards zero if hydrogen is going to be part of the global drive to zero. We have a world-leading industry. As I mentioned, we're already exporting products around the world. We have a well-established conventional energy sector and resources that can be levered and pivoted to provide that hydrogen into the marketplace, as well as skill sets and education and knowledge that is already there in the conventional energy sector that can also pivot towards producing hydrogen. We have a long-standing international collaboration. In fact, we've been collaborating with the UK and countries around the world for more than 40 years through initiatives like the IPHE, like the IEA, and through bilateral engagement as well. We have access to markets in Asia, as well as access on our East Coast into the UK and the European Union. And we have a unique starting point, as has been mentioned already. We're one of the world's top producers of hydrogen. We are a world-leading producer of clean hydrogen. In fact, the largest electrolytic hydrogen production facility currently is in Bécancour, Quebec. A 20-megawatt electrolyzer is up and running and producing clean hydrogen that's used in Quebec as well as into the eastern seaboard of the United States. Although I think the big push right now globally on electrolytic hydrogen production means that the 20 megawatt is quickly being dwarfed by a number of other global initiatives and global clean hydrogen production facilities that are going up. It's kind of like the world's tallest building was a few years ago, where just as one building is being completed and is the world's tallest, the next one is already up and running. And the same is happening now for clean hydrogen production. And we're seeing that as a global trend. The strategy includes 32 recommendations that are organized across 8 key pillars of action. And these recommendations are meant to really guide actions and lock in investments for the full opportunity presented by hydrogen so that we can fully seize it. And it also identifies that hydrogen is a short, medium, and long-term play. And so actions are sequenced over those timeframes. Yes, there's early low-hanging fruit where hydrogen can be deployed now in things like municipal bus fleets, for instance, but there's also those long-term, large-scale hydrogen deployment activities that need to happen. The strategy envisaged that by 2050, hydrogen could make up to 30% of Canada's energy mix, which would be complemented by other clean fuels, electrification, and there's always going to be a role for energy efficiency. That 30% of Canada's energy mix would lead to about 190 megatons of CO2 reductions by 2050. And those, as we all know, come from those hard to abate sectors of the economy where electrification isn't always technically or economically feasible. And this would require about 20 megatons of clean hydrogen. If that opportunity is fully seized, it leads to about 350,000 jobs in the hydrogen sector, and that could provide about $50 billion in domestic revenue, which is around the same scale as our conventional energy sector now. And we all know the global market is expected to reach upwards of $11.7 trillion by 2050. And Canada, the strategy points to how Canada can be a major player in that global market as well. Since releasing the strategy almost a year ago in December, we've been busy focusing on its implementation. We put in place a robust implementation framework that includes a high-level strategic steering committee composed of representatives from all levels of government, the private sector, Indigenous businesses and communities, and academia. And that high-level strategic steering committee is supported by 16 working groups that are focused on various aspects of the entire hydrogen value chain and delving deeper into identifying opportunities and challenges and undergoing further analysis to identify what are the barriers, what are the real barriers in things like marine or rail or medium and heavy duty, what needs to happen. And it's really bringing all the key players together to build and grow the hydrogen opportunity domestically. As well as internationally. And the strategy isn't just focused on the domestic market. Yes, it's a key part of it, but it also is really meant to position Canada to become that supplier of choice to the world for clean hydrogen and the technologies that use it. The federal budget in 2021 included several investments that also will help grow the hydrogen market. You heard some of those earlier on from NRC. There's the $1.5 billion Clean Fuels Fund, which is supporting the build out of clean fuel production facilities across the country, and that includes hydrogen, and $8 billion Strategic Innovation Fund that's focused on driving down emissions from heavy industry, and hydrogen, fuel switching to hydrogen could be one of those pathways. And then several tax measures and policies that really improve or build the hydrogen opportunity as well. And we're seeing the private sector come forward as well. There, in fact, just since the strategy was launched, there's been 2 hubs formally identified, which is really an initiative where subnational governments and industry partners in specific areas, Alberta Industrial Heartland and the Atlantic provinces, have come together and are growing that production to end use that we know is essential. These hubs are essential to growing domestic build out. And so the one in Alberta is really focused on, and I'm sure that Barbara will speak a bit more about it later, but really focused on opportunities in heavy industry and in municipal fleets to both produce and use hydrogen. And then the one that was just launched last week is in Atlantic Canada, which has a strong renewable potential and an existing but relatively new natural gas system that's where the infrastructure is actually a plastic system. And so it could be used to transport hydrogen without any of the potential for embrittlement that we know happens in older conventional natural gas systems. And then they're also looking on the Atlantic coast to become that export opportunity, that export gateway. In the last year, we've also seen several conventional energy companies announce plans to make significant investments to grow clean hydrogen production and use. But we know we can't do it alone. Strategic partnerships and international collaboration are essential, both domestically and around the world. And Canada has been attracting foreign direct investment for years, based on the fact that we have more than 100 world-leading hydrogen and fuel cell companies involved in in that sector already in Canada. And you're seeing, even in the middle of COVID in early 2020, Daimler and Volvo announced an investment of over $600 million into Canada to produce fuel cells for global deployment in medium and heavy duty trucks. And we continue to attract that foreign direct investment, but the strategy focuses on how we can do even more. And as I mentioned earlier, our products and services and technologies are already used around the world. But to fully seize the domestic opportunity and continue to build the global hydrogen economy, these strategic partnerships are essential. And that's why the sessions for this week are a key part of our path forward, and I look forward to the discussions. But as was mentioned as well, Canada has been collaborating with countries around the world, including the UK, for decades through various fora, multilateral fora, like the International Partnership for Hydrogen Fuel Cells and the Economy, the International Energy Agency, Mission Innovation, and recently in 2019, Canada led the development of the new Hydrogen Initiative under the Clean Energy Ministerial, which is ensuring that hydrogen's role in global energy transition remains on the radar of global energy ministers and fostering global collaboration. Membership's open to all countries as well as the private sector. And if anybody is interested in learning more about this, I would encourage you to either reach out to me or look at the website that exists. The SEM Hydrogen Initiative is really meant to be the cornerstone of international activities to advance commercial scale hydrogen and fuel cell deployment globally across all sectors of the economy. And through the SEM Hydrogen Initiative, there's been a comprehensive multi-year work plan that was developed with real actions, one of which is the Global Hydrogen Ports Coalition, which was launched in this past June and just last week had its first meeting. And this is bringing ports from around the world, looking at how hydrogen can be used in operations within a port to drive down emissions, but also how ports can be that gateway for hydrogen export and import. Certification, and you probably saw 2 weeks ago that the IPHE released a discussion document on a common global methodology for the determination of carbon intensities for clean hydrogen. And that's a key first step towards the development of a common standard. And we know that if hydrogen is going to be traded internationally, we do need that to happen. And that activity is also coordinated partially through the Clean Energy Ministerial. And then the biannual hydrogen report. So on October 4th, the most recent biannual hydrogen report was released. And this is a key deliverable of the SEM Hydrogen Initiative in partnership with the IEA. And it really looks at global deployment activities and what's happening, what are the global trends. And it's amazing to see how the global system has evolved just in the 2 years from 2019, when the first global hydrogen report was released, to 2021, when this one was just released. It was good to hear Richard North mention the SEM Hydrogen Initiative as a key opportunity, and I would echo that sentiment as well. But I also agree that there are several opportunities where we can work bilaterally with the UK. Both our companies and our governments can work together. Things like blending hydrogen and natural gas and policies and regulations. And I know that the UK is kind of world leading in this area, and I think Canada could learn from that. Hydrogen production with CCUS, municipal bus fleets, and marine opportunities also come to mind, but I'm sure we'll have a more robust discussion in the coming hours and days. We need to continue to work together, harnessing our strengths, investment commitments, and global momentum to seize the opportunity that hydrogen presents. Hydrogen's time is now. We're excited to be part of it. I'm excited to be part of this week-long discussion, and I look forward to the rest of the meetings. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Aaron. And I would agree that's already been an exciting range of presentations this morning on what clearly is a very ambitious agenda. So we're going to take a break now. We're a little bit behind schedule, but we'll take 10 rather than 15 minutes. And I suggest we aim to come back around 7 minutes past the hour and we'll reconvene. Thanks very much, everybody. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Make it 7 minutes past the hour. I hope everybody managed to get a quick leg stretch. So we're going to continue now with our Canadian speakers, and I'm going to turn straight away to Julie Poulin, who is the director responsible for the development of renewable energy at the Ministry for Energy and Natural Resources of Quebec. Julie, over to you.
Thanks, Sam. I will share. So you see my,
Yes, we can see you screen, Julie.
Okay, I will just put it at the first. Okay, so yes, Quebec adopted the GHG emissions reduction target of 37.5% below 1990 levels by 2030 and aims to be carbon neutral by 2050. Furthermore, Quebec aims to reduce the amount of petroleum products consumed by 40% by the end of the decade. The first strategy, Quebec Strategy for green hydrogen and bioenergy, which aims to make Quebec a leader in the production of these clean energies, will be released soon this fall. To reduce GHG emissions, electrification remains the priority. Green hydrogen and bioenergy will play a complementary role in electrification in sectors of economy that are difficult to electrify. So these two sectors will be strategic to achieve carbon neutrality in 2050. For our need today, I will focus more on the green hydrogen highlights of the strategy. So Quebec has the essential assets to become a key player in the production of green hydrogen, renewable electricity at a low cost, a reliable and robust distribution network, large reserves of fresh water, recognized expertise in the field of hydrogen, and favorable policies for carrying out projects. So the Quebec strategy has this is the consultation version of the strategy. So because the strategy will be released soon. So the strategy has 3 axes: business development, knowledge and innovation, and collaboration, information and promotion. So each of these axes has 2 goals. For the business development, we aims to develop production and distribution infrastructure and increase the use of green hydrogen and bioenergy. For knowledge and innovation, we want to improve knowledge and its diffusion and develop innovative solutions and processes. Then for collaboration, information and promotion, we want to increase the commitment of public and private actors in favor of development of green hydrogen and bioenergy sector. We also want to encourage the support of local and indigenous communities in the development of value chains. So finally, those are the promising uses of hydrogen that the strategy will abort. So the industrial processes, green chemistry, fuel cells, carbon neutral fuels, storage and balancing, then gas uses. So I'm inviting you to stay tuned for the soon release of the Quebec strategy.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Julie. So we're next going to turn to Alberta, and this time we'll have some video remarks from the Honourable Dale Nally, who's the Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity. And I think, Athena, you're going to bring them up on the screen for us next, if I'm not mistaken.
Hi, I'm Dale Nally, the Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity for the province of Alberta in Canada. I'd like to thank Consul General John Turner for the chance to talk about how we can work together to advance the global clean hydrogen economy. It has been a distinct pleasure of mine to tell the dynamic story of Alberta's responsible energy products. It's a story that has faced significant pressures over the past decade as jurisdictions worldwide strengthen their commitment to environmental and social governance. Alberta has the resources, experience, and technology needed to produce some of the lowest cost, responsibly produced clean hydrogen in the world. And as I speak to you today, I hope you will sense the great pride that we have in the entrepreneurship, innovation, and dedication that has brought us to this place, poised to be a significant global supplier of clean hydrogen for decades to come. Between our large natural gas reserves and our geology, which is well suited to carbon capture, utilization, and storage, Alberta is already an attractive investment opportunity for international hydrogen-focused companies. This includes companies, UK companies like BP, who are building their own hydrogen facilities in the United Kingdom. We have similar facilities in Alberta that can quickly be scaled up to produce low-cost, extremely low-carbon hydrogen. In fact, we've had a number of companies announce hydrogen projects in our province in the past few months, including Mitsubishi, Air Products, Petronas, and Shell. As these projects get underway, we'll continue to build our expertise in hydrogen production. Expertise that can be shared and used in collaboration with the UK's own emerging hydrogen economy. I should note that the UK's hydrogen strategy closely aligns with our own goals of bringing hydrogen into heating, transportation, industry, and power generation. As such, there's no doubt that we'll have tremendous opportunities to share knowledge and experience in the coming years. In particular, we're looking forward to seeing the UK's progress in blending hydrogen into existing natural gas lines and even building whole hydrogen communities. As the hydrogen sector grows and technology develops, we'll also be looking for new opportunities to collaborate on how to move and export hydrogen in a safe and efficient way. We invite British companies and investors to look to Alberta as a partner in building the foundations of a strong global hydrogen future. The global hydrogen sector is still in early days, but we believe it can be a big part of the global drive to reduce emissions and provide people with safe, reliable energy. I hope you'll consider the people, businesses, and government of Alberta as excited partners in the effort to reach our shared goals of decarbonization. My goal in particular is that Alberta becomes the preferred global supplier of hydrogen, as I know we are the most responsible jurisdiction to be producing this valuable commodity. This is a commitment recognized by many jurisdictions searching for partners in prosperity with shared ESG commitments. So thank you for taking the time to hear about Alberta's clean energy story, and thank you for participating in the UK-Canada Hydrogen Week.
So thanks to the Assistant Minister in Alberta. We're now going to stay in Alberta, and I'm going to turn to Barbara Corral, who's the Executive Director at the Ministry of Energy for the Government of Alberta, who's going to tell us a bit more about the strategy that the Associate Minister was referring to.
That's correct. And before I do get started, I'll just do a sound check because I understand there have been a few issues. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you fine, but I can see you're right that some people have been struggling. So sorry to those who have been struggling, and hopefully it's a limited problem and it's being fixed. Over to you, Barbara.
We will press ahead, and thank you so much for that kind introduction. I certainly am honored to have the opportunity to speak with you virtually today. It's always interesting to follow a minister, so hopefully the comments that I share with you today are indeed complimentary, but certainly a little bit deeper than what the minister shared. Before I get into my comments, I would like to recognize and thank the UK Science and Innovation Network and the British Consulate General in Calgary for including me in this important dialogue. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues from across Canada and Britain to speak today about Alberta's ambition to grow a domestic market for hydrogen, and perhaps most importantly for this audience, and certainly as the minister shared, to supply clean, low carbon hydrogen to global markets in the world. Next slide, please. Thank you. As we've heard from Associate Minister Nally, Alberta is excited about the opportunity to integrate hydrogen into our provincial energy system. Now, this enthusiasm comes from a deep understanding that the energy world is changing and a belief that Alberta's energy system can seize upon this as an opportunity to uphold our position as a reliable, responsible source of energy by incorporating clean, low carbon hydrogen into our energy portfolio. And I will note that while my comments largely reference to blue hydrogen, we certainly, as we bring forward our hydrogen roadmap, are inclusive of multiple production pathways, including that green or electrolytic hydrolysis process. Now, participants on this call likely will know that Alberta currently produces roughly 2/3 of Canada's current hydrogen production. That's around 2.4 million tons per year. And I'm happy to say that based on analysis jointly funded by the UK consulate in Calgary and the federal government and my own government, my province could become one of the lowest cost suppliers of hydrogen in the world. And so certainly our ambition is to dramatically grow our annual production. Now, last year, Alberta invited stakeholders from across the energy sector to share their perspectives on how best to incorporate hydrogen into our current energy system, beyond its current use, certainly. And similar to what Mr. McKay from the Scottish government noted, our stakeholders told us hydrogen could be deployed broadly into 4 domestic markets or pathways: residential and commercial heat, power generation, and mobility/transportation. They also said, though, that hydrogen could play a greater role in industrial processes beyond its current use. And certainly that is where largely those 2.4 million tons per year are being used. Most wisely, perhaps, they said, for Alberta, a relatively small market, the big opportunity was exports, and those exports largely would be into Asia. And certainly accessing this market should be achieved as soon as possible. This wisdom, knowledge, and experience informed the creation of Alberta's Hydrogen Roadmap, which will be outlined, which certainly outlined the pace and scale of Alberta's ambition. And as the minister shared, will be released in the coming weeks. I'm very excited to share that. Next slide, please. Well, I don't have a lot of time today. I will highlight a few key strengths Alberta brings to the hydrogen value chain. In addition to experience and scale, Alberta has industrial clusters in place, and abundant low-cost natural gas feedstock. That's why we're confident that we can be among the lowest cost producers of clean hydrogen in the world. Additionally, Alberta can leverage these resources with extensive existing energy infrastructure and subsurface geologic storage capacity. Alberta is also, I'll point out, the first jurisdiction in Canada with an established regulatory and risk management framework in place for large-scale CCUS projects. This will propel us forward quickly. Although we've yet to release our roadmap, it's clear Alberta's advantages in the value chain are creating a bit of a buzz. So I'm going to focus a little bit deeper on a few of these recent announcements. Air Products, for instance, has announced plans to build a 1.3 billion hydrogen production facility in Edmonton, where I'm coming from you today. The facility will produce clean, very low carbon hydrogen from natural gas with carbon capture and storage. In May of this year, Suncor Energy announced it is partnering with ATCO, one of our utility companies, on a clean hydrogen project near Fort Saskatchewan that will produce more than 3,000 tons of clean hydrogen per year using advanced technologies. I'll also point out that ATCO has expressed a desire to move forward with a hydrogen blending project into the Fort Saskatchewan area that's blending hydrogen into the residential utility heat segment, and has also announced ambitions to do a pure hydrogen community. Now, a few months ago, the Japanese trading house Itochu, in collaboration with Malaysian Petronas, announced a joint feasibility study for a 1.3 billion ammonia production facility with carbon capture utilization and storage near central Alberta. The project goal is to export low carbon ammonia as a hydrogen carrier to Asian markets. Furthermore, Shell and Mitsubishi recently announced a memorandum of understanding to create a natural gas-based hydrogen production facility with carbon capture and storage near Edmonton. This project will initially produce 165,000 tons of hydrogen per year and has intentions to export the hydrogen into Asian markets. Another exciting announcement is Dow Chemical. Just this month, October, Dow announced plans to build the world's first net zero carbon emissions integrated ethylene cracker and derivatives facility here in Alberta. This facility will convert cracker off gas into hydrogen as a clean fuel to be used in operations. Carbon capture and storage will also be used on site with emissions transported and permanently sequestered. Alberta is both grateful and very encouraged by these early investment announcements, and certainly we look forward to much more. And furthermore, we look forward to partnering regionally with jurisdictions such as the government of British Columbia, which have got companies who've got tremendous momentum already in this space. Next slide, please. This is my last slide, so I know I don't have much time. Again, I will focus on our intention under our hydrogen roadmap to move from ambition to action and from action to result. I can say as one of the key officials working on the hydrogen roadmap that our minds have quickly turned to implementation. And I can also share that the hydrogen roadmap is very aligned with the Canadian national strategy and the UK hydrogen strategy. Now, as Minister Nally said, we aim to hit the ground running, and we will quickly seek to build out alliances and establish areas of common interests. And fundamental is the desire to work with international partnerships and to collaborate in a number of key areas, particularly given the importance of that blue hydrogen production pathway to Alberta. Now, in particular, I'd like to highlight the importance of Alberta's strong working relationship with the United Kingdom and our fundamental alignment on key areas of interest. I'll highlight a few of those. Hydrogen production from natural gas with CCUS, that's an obvious one. Global intensity standards as the world seeks to gain greater clarity and standardization of what is meant when we speak about clean hydrogen. Certainly active collaboration with the UK government and our federal government, of course, is critical. Hydrogen blending standards, others have mentioned that, and the ability to blend hydrogen into existing infrastructure is another area where we see great opportunity to collaborate. Another area I've not heard a lot of mentioned today is in the area of hydrogen literacy. And certainly as the world looks to deploy hydrogen into the global economy, we have a lot of work to do to educate the public on the fundamentals of this value chain, and most importantly, on its safety. So last, I'll mention regulatory standards and codes, both domestic and international. That's an area where we see great opportunity for collaboration. So in conclusion, Alberta appreciates the collaborative research done with the UK government and the government of Canada, most recently done to understand techno-economic pathways for hydrogen production here in Alberta. This was critical to grounding our hydrogen roadmap, and we look forward to working together in the future. Thank you again for inviting me, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Barbara. And it's another absolutely fascinating insight into what is happening with the government of Alberta and hydrogen. And again, some very interesting questions posed around things like public perceptions. So we're going to move straight on now to British Columbia and to Guy Guernsey, who is with the Ministry of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation.
Thank you. Can everyone see my slideshow?
No, not yet.
Okay, just hold on. It's not coming up. Maybe I'll ask Natasha to bring it up.
Yes, sure, we'll bring it up for you.
Thank you.
I'll share my screen.
So while she's doing that, I'll just say, my name is Guy Guernsey. I'm the Director of the Energy and Industry Decarbonization Branch with the Government of British Columbia. here on the west coast of Canada. I'm also the director of the Innovative Clean Energy Fund, which is an innovative tech fund we have here in the province. We had an exciting announcement last week with $2 million in funding from the ICE Fund going to our first electrofuels project in Merritt, BC, which is led by Huron Clean Energy and Carbon Engineering and Oxy Low Carbon Ventures. And of course, hydrogen is a critical part of the refining process for ultra low carbon fuels. So if you're interested in just learning more about that, you can track that down. I'm here to talk about the strategy today, though, and our strategy was released back in the summer in July. If you do a Google search, you can find the strategy pretty quickly as the top result. Next slide. So as I said, it was released in July. One of the unique things that I want to sort of emphasize today is that hydrogen here in British Columbia is really embedded within our climate plan approach. And so we have our Clean BC plan is the provincial climate plan, which was released at the end of 2018. There will shortly be a revised plan coming out this fall. So look forward to that. And really, when we started this process of developing a hydrogen strategy about 4 years ago now, the question that I really asked was, what was the role of hydrogen in reducing emissions here in this province? And so that sort of led the initial question and framing about the strategy that you see today. And it was, 4 years of significant studies, research, and analysis by the time we got to the final product. Really what the strategy is about is how we will promote, incentivize, and support hydrogen production, use, and export here. British Columbia and Vancouver especially has been really the center of hydrogen fuel cell innovation for a long time. However, we don't actually have any significant hydrogen deployment here in the province per se. We've got four light-duty refueling stations now. That network is growing fast now. We're looking at other applications, including heavy duty, et cetera. But we're sort of at the early stage of that. The strategy has 63 policy actions that government will lead on over the short, medium, and long term. Next slide, please. So just talking about those, I really think that hydrogen needs an ecosystem of existing and supportive policies around it, rather than just financial support for helping it off the ground. And we have a lot of this here in British Columbia. What I don't have here is, first of all, is we have legislated emission reduction targets in British Columbia. So a 40% reduction by 2030, a 60% reduction by 2040, and an 80% reduction by 2050, as well as a commitment to net zero by 2050. We've had a long-standing carbon tax in British Columbia. It's currently sitting at $45 a ton. It will go up to $50 a ton next April. BC is one of the few jurisdictions in the world that has a low carbon fuel standard to reduce the carbon intensity of the fuels that are used in the province, and that rewards low carbon hydrogen. We have a zero emission vehicle mandate for light duty vehicles, and you'll see the targets there. We're also looking at extending that to heavy duty over time. British Columbia has vast natural gas resources, but also significant hydroelectric clean electricity resources. And so we're offering lower electricity rates to attract new low carbon load onto the system, and recently announced the Clean Industry and Innovation Rate, which provides a discount on the standard industrial electricity. We have, in regulation, we also have tools to decarbonize the natural gas system. So we have a greenhouse gas reduction regulation, which allows the gas utilities to acquire up to 15% of renewable gases, including clean hydrogen. We have in Clean BC in our climate plan a 15% renewable gas requirement. So by 2030, at least 15% of the content of the pipelines will need to be renewable. And then finally, in British Columbia, we have many remote communities around the province that aren't connected to either natural gas or electricity. and they are dependent on diesel for their electricity generation needs, and there's a commitment to reduce that by 80%. I would also note that we recently established something in BC called the Centre for Innovation in Clean Energy, and government funded $35 million for that center. That will be co-funded by Shell as well, and we're hoping to get some co-funding from the federal government for that to bring the total investment up to about $105 million. Hydrogen is one of the key pathways for the center to promote innovation and investment in the province. Next slide. The BC Hydrogen Strategy supports low carbon hydrogen, and that includes both green and blue. I won't say much more about that. We can leave that discussion for questions and answers. Next slide. This is a map of the province. Most of the population is centered down at the very bottom where you see the largest dot. This is an initial sketching of what the hubs will look like, hydrogen hubs will look like in the province. The largest dot on the bottom is Vancouver, the greater Vancouver area. The two dots to the left of that would be Victoria and Nanaimo. Moving to the right, you see an orange dot and the green dot smaller. Those are Kelowna and Kamloops. And then to the north, we see the larger green dot, which is Prince George. And then to the left, the smaller dot is a hub, port hub at the Port of Prince Rupert, where we see significant export potential for hydrogen-based low-carbon products like methanol and ammonia. Next slide. As I said, we do see significant export potential here from British Columbia for hydrogen-based products like methanol, ammonia, or hydrogen itself to our closest market, which is the Asia Pacific, Japan, South Korea, California, China, which is represents significant demand out to 2050 for low carbon hydrogen. Next slide. So as I said, we've just released our strategy about 3 months ago. We're moving into implementation now, and these are the top 3 areas that are of our focus for the next year. Anyway, so planning out and funding those hydrogen hubs, establishing a carbon intensity threshold for low carbon hydrogen production. And that's an important factor here because of the climate objectives that I mentioned to you, is that our focus here is ensuring that the hydrogen industry does not result in increased emissions in the province, but in fact significant decreased emissions by production and use in the province. And then identifying legislative and regulatory gaps for project development here, because it is a new industry, and we're recognizing that there are significant gaps where hydrogen just hasn't been thought of in the past and needs to be added into the frameworks. And last slide. And so if anyone has any questions about that, I'm happy to follow up either after this session or offline at a different time. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Guy. So we're now going to move to Tom North, who's the Director for Climate Change Programs and Partnerships at the Ontario Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. Over to you, Tom.
Hi, I'm just going to quickly confirm that everyone can hear me and see me.
Yep. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, perfect. So no slides for me, but happy to walk through where we are in Ontario today. Thanks for having me here, and thanks to all the folks who have already presented their strategies and plans. It certainly provides a lot of confidence to hear the collective efforts both within UK and across Canada to accelerate the hydrogen ecosystem, because I think there'll be a lot of information sharing and benefits across all. So last fall, Ontario announced its intent to develop a low carbon hydrogen strategy, which will be released later this year. So similar to my colleague in Quebec, I can talk about some of our proposed vision, principles, and some key areas of focus, but we'll ask you to stay tuned for the release of the strategy later this year. So one of the first steps we took to develop our strategy was to release a discussion paper, which is available still online, basically to seek input from hydrogen stakeholders, the public, and others on how to produce low carbon hydrogen, how to bring down the cost and accelerate the scale up of hydrogen technologies, including electrolyzers, fuel cells, how to leverage Ontario's existing and build new capacity for storage and distribution infrastructure, and also how to build up the demand side. So looking for end use applications across the economy, including opportunities for demand aggregation through clusters or hubs. We also wanted to better understand the different market segments that we saw in Ontario, including transportation, industrial end uses, building heat and power, and electricity for storage and grid balancing. So in summary, we're really looking across the entire hydrogen value chain for how do we produce low carbon hydrogen. Ontario's strategy is a low carbon hydrogen strategy. We haven't picked something from the color palette, so its focus really is on carbon intensity. Again, who are those, what are the potential end uses and who are the off takers, and how do we get it from point A to point B? So the proposed vision and principles we've laid out so far, again, these are working drafts and will be finalized in the strategy to be released later this year, but to leverage our existing strengths to develop a self-sustaining low carbon hydrogen sector in Ontario, creating jobs, attracting investments while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We also have 5 key principles that will guide us. The first is to reduce GHGs, then to generate economic development and jobs, to promote energy resiliency, to reduce barriers and enable action, and also to use hydrogen where and when it makes sense. So, I think as we look at hydrogen across other technologies in the fight against climate change, not looking for one silver bullet, but really looking to see where hydrogen makes sense in the context for Ontario. The one thing we also really believe here in Ontario is that we're well positioned to become a leader in low carbon hydrogen. We have a low carbon electricity supply to produce it. We have existing storage distribution infrastructure. We have leading companies, competitive business environment, and several established sectors that can really contribute to our success. For those of you unfamiliar with Ontario, it's a very large province with diverse geography and economic sectors, but that provides a lot of opportunities for hydrogen production and use pathways as we look at economy-wide decarbonization. So just to highlight a few things, we have one of the largest freight corridors in North America, stretching from Quebec to Windsor. In southwestern Ontario, we have clusters of refineries, chemical production. In northern Ontario, we have feedstock from sustainably managed forests. In the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, we have high density populations and businesses, so great for end uses for fleet or public transit. We also have opportunities across the province for heavy industry transformation, as well as resource recovery across the province from feedstock from landfills, as well as food and organic waste processing facilities. So Ontario government really believes in unleashing the power of the private sector to address climate change and the need to grow our economy sustainably. Our government's approach to fighting climate change and protecting the environment is based on the recognition that clean environment and strong economy go hand in hand. And low carbon hydrogen is increasingly playing a larger role in how we view the future of our fight against climate change, reducing greenhouse gases, as well as creating jobs and other economic opportunities. Ontario is committed to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030, and we are already well on our way to meeting that target. Just to take a step back for a second and connect to hydrogen, on the clean electricity, Ontario has taken one of Ontario's biggest actions on climate change to date was eliminating coal-fired electricity, which was the biggest greenhouse gas reduction initiative in Canadian history. It also made Ontario the first North American jurisdiction with a significant reliance on coal to cease coal-fired power generation. So really what we're looking at here for the production of, for example, green hydrogen is leveraging these past investments in decarbonizing our electricity system to support low carbon hydrogen production. I also want to highlight some of the existing manufacturing in Ontario. So we already have hydrogen projects and businesses underway. As Aaron mentioned, Canada is already a leader in both the technology side and export side of it. So we have here in Ontario 2 of the few global hydrogen electrolyzer firms, Cummins and Next Hydrogen. We have fuel cell component makers with operations in Canada and Ontario, including Cummins and Dana. New Flyer, one of North America's only hydrogen bus manufacturers, has operations here in Ontario. Canadian Tire and Walmart are already using hydrogen-powered forklifts in our distribution centers. And there's an exciting new power to gas pilot underway between Enbridge Gas and Cummins as well, where they're injecting hydrogen into the natural gas pipelines in Markham. So looking again at Ontario, what we see is our competitive advantages with our existing infrastructure, our clean electricity system, and a lot of the great businesses we already have underway. To get this momentum really moving forward, we established an industry working group last spring, made up of industry and academics to bring sort of that sector expertise from across the entire hydrogen value chain. And what we really asked of this group was to help us to better understand the feedback that we received through the discussion paper and stakeholder webinar sessions, including with Indigenous communities and many of the key players in the hydrogen sector, to really understand what current government programs can be leveraged or repurposed to support the hydrogen economy scale up, look for recommendations for government interventions in both the near and long term, as well as look for opportunities to align with the Hydrogen Strategy for Canada and other federal funding opportunities, and to ensure that we have sort of a consistent approach across the country to make it easier for businesses to scale up and to build. So our government sees tremendous potential in hydrogen as an alternative low carbon fuel. In addition to fueling trucks and ships, low carbon hydrogen can be used for industrial processes and electricity storage, as well as blended into natural gas pipelines, as I mentioned. So I guess in conclusion, we are in the process of finalizing our strategy. We do expect it to be released later this year. So I think at this time, I'll ask you to stay tuned for its release. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions as we move forward.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Tom. So we're on to our final speaker from the Canadian side before we go into Q&A, and that is Alistair McLean, who's going to give us the view from Atlantic Canada. Alistair is the Executive Director of the Offshore Energy Research Association. Over to you, Alistair.
Thanks very much, Sam. I'm delighted to participate in this discussion, and congratulations to the other panelists for the success to date. It's a good thing, it's a good global industry, a large global industry, because I think everybody thinks we're going to be a leader. I will begin by acknowledging that OERA is based in Nova Scotia, or Mi'kmaq, the unceded territory and ancestral homeland of the Mi'kmaq Nation. Our relationship is based on a series of peace and friendship treaties between the Mi'kmaq Nation and the Crown dating back to 1725. OERA is an independent research association that is helping Atlantic Canada move toward a more sustainable energy future by leading R&D that produces credible and objective data and informs sound energy policies and decisions through the transition to net zero. For the listeners outside of Canada, Atlantic Canada refers to the 4 provinces east of Quebec: New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Collectively, we're the home to about 2.3 million people and have a gross domestic product of about $120 billion. Our ports have been the gateways between the UK and Canada for centuries. It's a shorter boat ride from St. John's in Newfoundland and Labrador to Southampton than it is from Naples. 7% of Canada's hydrogen production, about 200,000 tons, is produced in Atlantic Canada by Irving Oil for its refinery in St. John, New Brunswick. The natural gas distribution systems in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick are modern and are made predominantly from polyethylene pipes that are hydrogen compatible. Because of this, the region already has the most hydrogen-ready gas grid in North America. 2 recent feasibility studies coordinated by our team at OERA and authored by Zen Clean Energy Solutions on the role that hydrogen can play to support clean energy policy objectives in Atlantic Canada determined that hydrogen could deliver about 20% of our region's energy by 2050. Further, due to Atlantic Canada's abundance of wind and hydro resources, the region could generate significant revenue by exporting low carbon hydrogen to Europe. These studies also concluded that our region faces challenges that must be addressed for hydrogen to reach its potential. And critical policy and infrastructure investments must be made in the near term to initiate hydrogen development in Atlantic Canada. OERA is appreciative of the funding to make these studies possible from Natural Resources Canada, the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, the province of Nova Scotia, and Heritage Gas and Liberty Utilities, the natural gas utilities in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. The Atlantic Hydrogen Alliance was created to take on these challenges. Launched last week in Halifax by the founding members, OERA, EcoNext, Atlantica Center for Energy, Heritage Gas, Liberty Utilities, St. John Energy, Port of Halifax, and Deloitte. The Alliance is a strategic working group of industry representatives, researchers, and others who come together to drive hydrogen collaboration. The Alliance is an impressive example of regional collaboration, with its members sharing their expertise, skills, and a collective and unified desire to fully explore and tap into hydrogen's potential for Atlantic Canada. The Alliance's work will be driven by conversations with representatives of industry, utilities, academia, Indigenous groups, NGOs, and 3 levels of government. The Alliance will focus on 4 key deliverables that will be supported by dedicated working groups. The deliverables are to complete an Atlantic Hydrogen Roadmap that describes the optimal low carbon hydrogen production methods, distribution systems, and end uses for the development and deployment of hydrogen in Atlantic Canada. The roadmap will lead to a thorough understanding of hydrogen supply and demand in Atlantic Canada and the international demand opportunities that could be supplied by Atlantic Canada. To identify and develop the key enabling conditions for hydrogen to development in Atlantic Canada, including policies, regulations, codes, and standards. This work will be developed through collaboration with regional, national, and international experts, like my colleagues on this panel. The third is to facilitate the creation of 1 or more hydrogen hubs in Atlantic Canada to develop and deploy local hydrogen projects across the full hydrogen value chain by identifying and establishing a pipeline of potential pilot, demonstration, and commercial hydrogen projects, including project scope, funding requirements, timeline, project developers, and partners. Our goal is to create a framework for the strategic coordination of public and private investments that enable a scale of hydrogen production, storage, transportation, and demand capable of achieving long-term economic viability. And fourth, to develop and execute a communications, engagement, and advocacy plan that will support the other 3 deliverables. Pardon me. The plan will promote the development of hydrogen in Atlantic Canada through regular communication with stakeholders and the public, advocacy and engagement with government and other key stakeholders to raise awareness of the economic and environmental potential for hydrogen in our region. We know in Atlantic Canada that it's early days for us with respect to low carbon hydrogen. Progress has been made in the past year, but there's more work ahead. I have no doubt there's much that we can learn from the good work already accomplished in the other parts of Canada and the UK. We have the passion, expertise, and regional structure in place to advance the development of clean hydrogen in Atlantic Canada, and we're motivated to make big gains. If you'd like to learn more about hydrogen in Atlantic Canada, go to atlantichydrogen.ca, that's one word, atlantichydrogen.ca, or email hydrogen@ovra.ca. Over to you, Sam.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Alistair. And that brings us to the end of our panel of speakers from the UK and Canada. And I think it's clear that we've had a real tour of emerging both national and subnational hydrogen strategies. And so I'd like to thank all of our speakers for all the preparation they did to take us through that today. We've got about 10 minutes remaining for questions. We've had quite a lot of questions in the chat bar. So I'd like now to invite all of the panelists to switch their cameras back on. And if people who've joined us for the webinar today would like to ask any more questions, now's your chance. Please continue to put them in the chat bar. But I think I'll start, as always, and abuse my position as moderator by asking a question which is obviously dear to my heart, given the job I do here at the High Commission on international collaboration. And many of you touched on this in your presentations, both about regional collaboration, but about international collaboration. And I wondered if I could just ask for further insights on this topic, and particularly where people see the primary areas for international collaboration, but also where maybe it's actually it's going to be necessary to collaborate internationally, particularly when we're thinking about the creation of a global market. I thought I might turn first of all to Richard, our very first speaker, to come back in again on this point, assuming he is still on the line.
Thanks, Sam. I am indeed on the line. I think Some of the areas that we think are most important in terms of international collaboration, we've obviously set out in Chapter 4 of the UK strategy. I think as well, I mentioned earlier that we think a lot about the kind of the supply push, distribution, and matching that up with the pull and the demand side. You can think of it in a number of different ways. For example, you can look at the technological readiness status of different parts of the hydrogen system. At the moment, for example, I think that makes research and innovation collaboration particularly important when it comes to green hydrogen production in particular. So you'll see a lot of activity in coming weeks at COP, for example, on efforts that can be put in place to reduce the cost, not only of production once you get electrolyzers in place, but equally in terms of the production cost of the electrolyzers themselves. And I think you can carry a lot of that work through to the different applications when it comes to different end uses of hydrogen. So, for example, there's a lot of activity going on partly under programs like the US Department of Energy's Earthshot program, looking at power turbines and at different kind of specific uses and specific technologies in different applications. So I think probably research and collaboration is the route of where we need to get to, bearing in mind the sort of low state of technological readiness and indeed distribution of hydrogen globally at this point in time. But of course, as we go forward, we also need to be thinking in parallel about the policy and the regulatory sharing that we can do to set up that global market. So we mentioned earlier, of course, the Clean Energy Minister's Hydrogen Initiative, which is looking at specific sectors and specific uses, including ports and urban applications of hydrogen. But equally, the trade rules and the common methodologies that are being developed by the IPHE, we're putting a lot of store by those work streams. And I think it's really important that we make sure that we progress those in parallel now to that R&D collaboration, which will set us up to be where we need to for 2030. But of course, we can't wake up tomorrow, essentially, and expect for us to be where we need to in terms of that global market. So it really is a sort of three-pronged approach, as it were, through technology, the policy and the regulatory, and those kind of trade rules and common standards. But they do each need to proceed in parallel at this stage in time.
Thanks, Richard. That's some really great insight. I wonder if I could turn to one of our Canadian panelists to talk about the same subject and answer the same question. I can either pick someone, or if Aaron, I can see you've switched your mic on.
Sure. I think, as I mentioned, collaboration both domestically and internationally are essential to moving forward. And as was just mentioned, it's not just collaboration on the deployment side of things. It's everything from fundamental RD&D. Our researchers are already working together, as we heard from the NRC earlier, and then all the way up to and including production, distribution, and use. And you're right. It is about the global trade. And if we're going to talk about establishing global supply chains, the only way to do that is through collaboration on common standards, collaboration on best methods, whether it's ammonia or blue or methanol or any of the above, to get the hydrogen from production countries into the export market. Like, all of those pieces are essential for collaboration, are essential to grow the global market. And so things like the IPHE, like the Clean Energy Minister, like the IEA, and then bilateral collaboration is essential as well. And it's not just governments working together. Sure, that's part of it, but industry has to work with industry as well, and subnational governments have to work together as well. So under the Clean Energy Ministerial, for instance, there's a Twin Cities program that is being developed as well, where cities can work together to collaborate on how to push forward on hydrogen. So it's a key component of, I think, pretty much every strategy that's out there, and it's essential for us as well.
Thanks, Aaron. And I think it's right that we're going to hear a lot more about this in the next couple of weeks with the COP26 summit, particularly on how we take advantage of things like the Clean Energy Ministerial and to do more on areas like hydrogen. Tom, I can see you've also got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just going to add, one of the things we heard really clearly from our industry stakeholders, and this reflects what Aaron was saying, is the need for, especially within Canada, I think more broadly too, sort of a consistent and aligned regulatory frameworks where possible, so they're not dealing with sort of patchwork of regulatory frameworks across the country and worldwide. I think also on the codes and standards. I think I read recently that at least for passenger vehicles, there were some agreements made on common refueling infrastructure and plugins and stuff like that. I think that will be really important as well. I think the one interesting area also is collaboration and potential, for funding, right? So I think financing, because especially for low carbon hydrogen, where it's a brand new market, is the financing part of the tricky part of the puzzle, I think, for a lot of these organizations. So looking at where we can collaborate on funding, whether it's across jurisdictions. Certainly here in Canada, the federal government has a lot of funding, opportunities that are available, but also saw that the German government has also recently announced that they're willing to fund projects outside of Germany that help to, sort of bring this technology to scale. So I think that will be a key part in both within the, also with the individual organizations and companies.
Great, thanks very much, Tom. I think I'll move now on to what was the second set of questions that came in, which was around safety. And I think some of our audience members pointed out that the oil and gas industry has a long history of working with pressurized gases and other liquids, and that some of the pressures that are being spoken about for things like public transport are actually very high pressures, and that which would be considered to be dangerous in the oil and gas industry. And yet they're going to be potentially quite commonplace even amongst the public with transportation vehicles. So it's really a question around the extent to which at the moment, as you approach your strategies, you're working with safety groups, perhaps road safety transport groups, and how significant this is as part of your work. This question came up when Stuart was speaking and outlined the Scottish Government approach. I wonder, Stuart, if you're still with us and could take that question first. I can't see Stuart, so perhaps he's had to leave. So I don't know if any other panelists have any, or Stuart's been having IT issues, I can see. So if any other panelists have any thoughts on safety and this as an aspect of the strategies, that would be interesting, I think, to hear.
I guess I'll add a quick thing to serve in the vacuum here. So, safety was something certainly we discussed with our industry working group. I think one of the things I was surprised at, though, was at least here in Ontario, is that, the safety certificate and areas of, safety that already exist. There's a lot of experience. Hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen may be new and developing, but hydrogen as a fuel itself has existed for a long time, and there's a mature market, especially with gray and brown hydrogen. So a lot of the processes that are in place are sort of there for those hydrogen, for that hydrogen type. And then I think the other piece is looking at when we spoke with our folks and at our safety, so our TSSA and sort of our codes and standards folks in Canada and Ontario, was that a lot of the professions that are out there around natural gas or other types of gases, there may be some tweaking required to accommodate them for hydrogen uses, but a lot of those things are there, right? So it's not like we're starting from scratch, given that we have, I think, existing infrastructure already in place, not only for hydrogen, but also for other gases too that can be leveraged.
And maybe for 2 seconds, I know we're bouncing up against the end time, but I mean, Canada has been working with countries around the world on hydrogen safety for probably 30 years through the IEA. There's a fully dedicated working group, and then there's the TC 197 under ISO. And I would say that hydrogen is probably the most robust in terms of safety codes and standards development of any of the fuels that I've ever seen. I always say, like, if natural gas or gasoline were to be regulated and brought into a system now, it would never happen because of the safety concerns. It's just that for 100 years we've been using it. But I would say there's a pretty robust frame in place now through things like the IPHE codes and standards, safety codes and standards working group, and the US DOE-led Center for Hydrogen Safety that's run out of the DOE lab in NREL, Colorado. So there's lots happening and continues to happen on safety. And
Aaron, I think you turn your mute on, but I can see, unless you want to finish, Aaron.
I'm done, thanks.
Done. And I can see Guy's got his hand up, and then I think we're running up against our time in a minute, so we'll draw it to a close after Guy.
Yeah, just to wrap this up, I think Barb Coral made a good comment in her presentation about public education. And, I would say that for safety and deployment in the province here, really it comes down to, all politics is local. And we've seen this even for the building of light duty hydrogen refueling stations, that it really comes down to that council meeting, you know, in a local government where that station's being permitted. And if there's a lack of understanding about hydrogen and what it is and whether it's safe or not, that really can get in the way of approving a project like that. So just like Barb mentioned, I think we're in British Columbia focused really on getting out there and talking about public education to broaden the understanding about hydrogen, and that it, you know, it is a regulated activity. It can be done safely, just like any other, you know, fuel that's combustible or explosive. And when done right and properly and according to the right regulatory process, then it's just as safe as everything else.
That's great, Guy. Thank you. And I think that it's clear that public perception is something which has come through lots of the presentations today, and clearly there's a lot more work to be done, and that's certainly something I'll take away when we look at what we as a High Commission do in future on this agenda. So I think with that second question there, we're going to draw this to a close. We've come up against our time limit, unfortunately. But I think it's clear from today that there's a huge amount of very detailed planning going on for what is clearly a very ambitious agenda. We're going to go into more depth in the next 4 days on various aspects of this, starting tomorrow with industrial led activities and particularly focusing on transport. So I would encourage everyone who's joined today to continue to join us throughout the week as you can. We've got a fantastic set of speakers for each day, very much like today, hopefully perhaps a bit more time for Q&A, but certainly over the next 4 days, we'll be going into lots of different aspects. If there's any questions that you'd like to ask Mario or I, or for any other details, or to link in, please find us on LinkedIn and you can connect with us and reach out to us. That's no problem at all. But otherwise, I look forward to continuing this UK-Canada hydrogen journey with all of you over not just this week, but over the coming months and years. And thank you again to all of our speakers today and for all of our audience for joining us. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.